up, DFF Army? Been a minute, but I wanted to drop a quick video on some value over replacement player data. I'm not trying to drop any groundbreaking findings or anything like that here. As a matter of fact, I don't want anybody to think that I think this is some predictive statistic or anything like that, really. I think actually this should be taken with a grain of salt, but I did want to look into VORP data to kind of tackle the long-held theory and potential misconception that running backs are more valuable compared to wide receivers in a certain range, especially those middle rounds. Now, you hear about that a lot, like, running backs in terms of value over a replacement player hold a lot more value than wide receivers. So I wanted to pull some of the data that was available and just kind of look into this and see if there was anything to it, if we could find anything, glean anything, take anything from it. Now, I think there's a couple different ways you can use value over replacement. It's mainly a production metric, a production statistic, a production number. Value over replacement is really just looking at what a player's value is in comparison to a waiver wire player, right? So very simply put, if the top player, let's just say Austin Eckler at the running back position last year, let's just say he scored 300 points and a replacement player, a waiver wire player, scored 100 points, right? Then Austin Eckler's value over replacement would be 200 points, right? Because all you're doing is subtracting Austin Eckler's points, 300, minus the waiver wire player's points, the replacement player's points, which would be 100 in this case. And value over replacement player can really help us determine how much more valuable certain players are, obviously compared to the field, compared to waiver wire, compared to other players in the same position. But we can also look position to position to kind of see within the same range, is one more valuable than the other, right? And that's kind of the idea of what I was looking at here. Again, kind of taken with a grain of salt. This is not a predictive metric. This is not something that you should use to determine the longevity of a player or a player over a number of years. But I think value over replacement player can help you in determining close decisions. Are these two players' VORP greater than this one player's VORP, right? If not, then that one player may be the guy that you actually want, right? And of course, these are specific scenarios. Again, in a draft, similarly, in a certain range, should you be targeting a certain position, certain players over others? And you can use value over replacement to help you with that. I think in terms of Dynasty, really more of a year-to-year thing, really more of a win now type number to look at. So now that I've just kind of gone over that portion of it, just kind of an overview of what it is, just talking about kind of why I'm even looking at it, let's just jump into the data I pulled. Pretty simple stuff. I'll explain it, and then I'll just tell you kind of my findings, which weren't even that crazy. I just didn't really want to waste some research here. Figured I may as well just drop it and give it to the folks, and if it helps anybody out, great. Okay, cool. So just hopping down to the bottom here just to show you on the second page, I have 2018 data, 2019 data on the first page, 2020, 2021, 2022. Okay, so I have 5 years worth of data here. And what I was, again, really looking at was in certain ranges, the difference in value over replacement player between wide receiver and running back on average. Okay, and I looked at the top 8, the top 12, and 13 through 36 because I really wanted to see those middle rounds, right? I really wanted to see kind of into that 7th round range about, which is what we're talking about here in his 12-team league, and see kind of was one position more valuable than the other in terms of point scoring. So if we go back to 2018, I think it's kind of interesting to look at this in general. And what I want to say here before I get into this is I took the value over replacement player data from Fantasy Pros, and which came with the games played, and I divided it by games played to get us VORP on a per game basis. So going to 2018, we can see running backs held a pretty strong advantage at the top in the top 8, an average VORP of above 17 compared to 13 for the wide receivers, right? So a variance of about 4.5. You see the same thing in the top 12 range, about 3.5 variance. And then you go down to that 13 through 36 range, and it's a 0.82 variance. So really, the biggest difference is at the top where you want to kind of select those running backs and kind of hone in on those running backs compared to the wide receiver position. And this is back in 2018. So if we go up to our first page and we look at 2019, similar thing for the top 8 and the top 12, over 4.5 variance for the top 8, about 4.5 for the top 12. And then we go down and then we go into the 13 through 36 bucket, and we see it's 1.26 variance. Okay, so it increased slightly there, but nothing too serious. So you would say in that range, running back in 2019 also held an advantage in all of the buckets shown here. Go to 2020, and we see that things come down a bit altogether, right? 1.19 in the top 8, 1.18 in the top 12, 0.76 back down to kind of that 2018 range for the 13 through 36 bucket. Go up to 2021, and we see it continue to change, continue to decline for the advantage towards the running backs. And we see in 2021, the year that Cooper Kupp went absolutely berserk, the wide receiver position actually took the mantle here in terms of average VORP in the top 8. There was a negative 0.34 variance, and we're obviously subtracting running back minus wide receiver average VORP, which is why you get that negative. Then we see in the top 12, it's actually straight even. 13 through 36 bucket, nearly even. 0.4 variance. 2022, we see it rise back up a bit. Running back took the advantage back over, right? But it's still pretty negligible if you ask me. So looking at the numbers over the last 5 years and just kind of looking and just thinking about kind of the arc of the numbers over those years, you can maybe kind of pick out, I wouldn't want to call it trends, but you can pick out some sort of kind of patterns maybe that are occurring here. And we can think about a little bit about why. But before I get into that, just look at the final pieces of data I posted here. And that's a 5-year average variance of the 13 through 36 bucket, a 3-year average of the same bucket, 2020 to 2021 average, and a 21 to 2022 average, just to kind of see if we see any stark differences. And really, to me, in that range, it's all about the same. It's really negligible. There's really not much difference here. And, I kept going. I looked at, buckets 37 through 56 and kind of kept going. And it doesn't take far to get down to where there's really zero value over replacement player, about probably like the 70th-ish player for either of these positions. So just looking at it, you can conclude that obviously in the top 12, you want to focus on running back, and that's where running backs have the biggest advantage in terms of value over replacement player, right? So you want to kind of make sure that if you're especially contending for Dynasty and that type of thing, you want to have 1 or 2 of those backs in the top 12 because they're going to give you a significant advantage over the field of running backs that you'd have to play otherwise. In terms of wide receiver, it's not as stark of a difference between the value over replacement players, so you can kind of weight that off a little bit when we're talking about the top 12. Once we get outside of that, though, I think analysts may overstate a little bit the need to draft a running back over a wide receiver in those middle rounds. It actually levels out a bit if you look at the data here, okay? It really does. It levels out a bit, and you can kind of eliminate position from your decision-making, right? It doesn't need to be a major factor in terms of your decision-making unless roster construction is just like some wild setting where you have to start a ton of one position or another. But if it's split and you can start flex players and whatnot, you just got to go best player available in terms of position when it comes to running back or wide receiver. There's really just not that big of a difference. In terms of what I was looking for, I think the findings kind of support what my hypothesis was, which was that there really just isn't that big of a difference between the running back and the wide receiver position in those middle rounds. Certainly at the top, there is a major difference, but let's just, once again, before we get out of here, take a look at the top and see how much it's changed over time, right? I think that there was a much bigger conversation to be had around value over replacement player in terms of running back and wide receiver, especially at the top in the past. 2018, again, that 4 to 5 variance in 2018, 2019 at the top. But then you see it dip significantly in terms of the top 8 and top 12 in 2020 and 2021. And even in 2022, it wasn't as stark as it was in 2018-19. So I think we could see the positions coming a lot closer together in terms of fantasy production. I think it has a lot to do with the NFL landscape and how they're turning to much more of a pass-happy league, right? High-flying offenses are what people want to see. It's what the NFL is pushing, and it makes sense that we'd see more fantasy points coming from the wide receiver position. We've also seen an influx of really good wide receivers, especially in 2021. We had an incredibly good rookie class. 2020 wasn't as good, so we could see it come down a little bit. So, if you just kind of look at the trajectory and patterns of the league, you can see kind of why some of these things are occurring. I thought this was really interesting to share. I hope that this helps eliminate position from your decision-making as much in those middle rounds, and you just pick the best players available and don't hone in on those running backs, especially right now. I've talked a lot about in my strategy videos, don't go after those running backs right now. There's a massive transition period, and they're going to just kind of fall off a cliff in terms of value. You're going to just have these players, these anchors sitting on your roster, these roster cloggers that you hear people talk about all the time. That's what a lot of these running backs are going to turn into. So for me, the data just kind of shows me that I can go for wide receivers in those middle rounds, and I don't really need to focus on running back as much as we may have thought in the past, really. I think this is more of a theory of the past, something that we could have applied a couple of years ago, but I really didn't see much value over replacement player research done in the past couple of years, and I could probably take this deeper. We could probably take it a little bit deeper, but I think this was a really good, at least baseline surface level kind of discussion around the data to kind of bring it forward into the future and talk a little bit about where we are rather than where we were and the differences in the NFL landscape and in the fantasy landscape, and try to apply the current data to the current market and try to utilize it in some effective way. So hope you guys enjoyed this. I probably talked a little bit too much about the value over replacement stuff and VORP and got probably way too much into the weeds and too granular with the data, but I had an itch to kind of do some research and kind of dig into some data, and I think I may have found some interesting findings. So hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like what we're doing at the DFF YouTube page, please subscribe. Please join us at dynastyfootballfactory.com. Sign up. Hop in the Discord. It's a great time. And yeah, until next time, catch you later, fam.